Hello, good morning. Welcome to Hillstrong's OT Cyber Coffee Minute, Caffeinated OT Cyber Insights with Roger Hill. Today I wanted to do something a little bit different. Most of you know we do a monthly webinar. We also do a live Q&A at the end, but I've noticed over time we're really not getting to all the questions. So today we just want to answer some of those questions that you may have had that we didn't get a chance to answer. With me, I've got Roger Hill, our founder here at Hillstrong. Good morning, Roger.
Morning, Kara. How are you?
Good. So off the cuff, Roger has not seen these questions, so I'm putting him on the spot. So we always say continue production without interruption, but how can organizations prioritize cybersecurity without disrupting their ongoing operations?
Wow. So that's actually a really interesting question, and I think I've said this more than a few times. That might actually be a topic for an entire webinar. So off the top of my head, I think it depends upon what stage of the journey you are for a program. So there are, generally speaking, some low-hanging fruit that you can address. If you're in the earlier stages, for example, you're a manufacturer building out an OT cybersecurity program, there's many organizational aspects of the program that you can address first. Who's responsible, right? For example, are you going to assign an OT cybersecurity director that reports up to the CISO so that you have that person who's responsible for the actual budget and overall responsibility of the program. From there, it's really building out a lot of the program elements, the charter. Think of the charter as really the overall manual for the organization of what this program is and what that mission is. To a lot of the organizational aspects of creating those RACI charts, who's responsible, who's a contributor, who has authority. These are the devil's already always in the details, isn't it?
Yeah.
So it's really crucial. So this is low-hanging fruit that you can do to just get organized and prepared for maturing and increasing your capability as an organization. Then once of course, I always state it's about people, process, and technologies. Well, it's also dependent upon where you are within your organization. Have you done any type of risk assessments at the plant level, understanding where your plants are? If you can always reach out to a third-party organization such as us or somebody else to help you with that. But there's also some free tools that you can do this. For example, the CSET tool from CSIS. So that's the cybersecurity self-evaluation tool. Generally, from my own experience, sometimes it helps to have a third party or outside voice to help support and help secure that budget, quite frankly. But that's probably another discussion.
Yeah.
Ultimately, there's about 5 things that you should focus on in terms of the technical controls, starting with segmentation. So often, though, that could start to encroach into that area of needing to have some downtime to implement those controls. So there's plenty of things to focus on that don't require downtime. I hope that answered the question.
It does. And one of the things that we run into and the question we get a lot is what role does employee training really play in strengthening the OT cybersecurity programs and lack thereof? Can you speak to those?
Yeah, so that arguably is probably one of the most important factors. Having an organization where every member of that organization are so integral, whether it's operations, controls engineering, maintenance, information security, across the board, every role is actually integral to what we talk about accomplishing the mission. And that mission is to create a product based upon your quality expectations to the number of units you need, distribute it to a point of sale and selling it. Everything else is supporting that mission. So having said that, for OT security, it's very important to go beyond your typical annual information security awareness training. There should be an OT unique element of what is the awareness training look like from an operational technology perspective, right? But then we should also incorporate elements such as privileged users.
Mhm.
Ask me to say that 3 times fast.
I would
So
never.
that that's an important element, though.
Yeah.
When we're thinking about maintenance, it could be the electricians or controls engineering, the individuals that may, for a certain facility, have access to downloading a new PLC program. Uh, Having that additional layer of responsibility of the credentials used to access that and the responsibilities that go with that and category and how we are integrating with our change control process or at least notification. So there's a lot of elements of privileged user, but also third party integration, if you will. And what I mean by that specifically, within the OT space at that plant level, third parties are integral. That's not going to change. And what I mean by that is often when we're looking at some type of a manufacturing process or a chemical process or whatever the case may be, you might have a vendor that has some SLAs, service level agreements with your organization to help tune and maintain, sometimes even operate a critical complex piece of machinery, right? As such, who are the authorized members from that third party organization? Are they utilizing their own assets to connect into your systems? How are you validating the security of those systems so that they're not introducing new risk? But there's also the element of just during that scheduled downtime in the industrial world. That's where typically in that 2 week window in the summertime, for example, you have an army of integrators coming in doing all sorts of work in that 2 week window.
Mhm.
So that's integrators, solution partners, contractors, subcontractors. What is the policy of the company for bringing in your own laptop, um,
Mhm.
connecting into our information systems as it relates to the OT systems, but also uh, how are we authorized to connect third party equipment to the critical industrial networks? So, these are all elements that are very, very crucial and people understanding their roles and responsibility is really, truly your first line of defense.
Awesome. Okay, so what would you say to someone that maybe has inherited an OT cybersecurity program? How would they measure the effectiveness of that going in? If maybe they're a new CISO at an organization.
That's probably one of the most common business
Mhm.
drivers. I think we've talked about this before, Kara, where new CISO will go into an organization and want to put a stake in the ground, or they just recently inherited OT security on top of their enterprise information security responsibilities. Generally, that conversation starts with, "I'm trying to wrap my arms around what I just inherited." Right. So
Mhm.
the first thing is how familiar is that CISO with the operation side? Typically, not very, but that's okay.
Mhm.
That's the first element is reaching over to the other verticals, such as the operations, to really start learning and gaining perspective to understand what you inherited in terms of the operations. It's not just the technical assets. And this is probably the most significant deviation from a typical CISO responsibility. And that is probably 90% of the assets that a CISO is ultimately responsible for securing and protecting are actually owned by IT, right?
Yeah.
Now, here's the challenge when you look at the OT side of the house, virtually none of the assets are owned by IT. They're they're actually owned by the operations, and that thread goes all the way up through the COO. So now you have this challenge of how do I secure something where I don't necessarily own it? But then there's another avenue that is very crucial to look at. and that is understanding the mission of operations. And that is that's something I would underscore. So in the world according to Roger, and not just Roger, the great work done by the NCCOE.
Yeah, sure.
I happen to agree with the idea of the pillars, that your mission as an operations is focused on your product quality, your product availability, human safety, environmental safety, and the information as it relates to that cyber physical process, or automating that cyber physical process. Those are the 5 pillars. So when you look across those 5 pillars, the first thing for a CISO to understand, and more importantly, be able to communicate to the operations side of the house, is that any security control that we propose to implement in the future will align with one of those 5 pillars or multiple, or we're not going to do it. Right.
Okay.
And that's the first step into tearing down some of the organizational silos and creating that unified mission, that our goal as an organization is unified. We want to help you become operational resilient. So what does that mean? Well, it means increasing your availability, your ability to detect and anticipate a potential attack, be able to respond and withstand, and most importantly, be able to recover and then adapt. So all of that leads to resilience, and that is aligned to cyber, but also non-cyber. So it should be a unified mission.
Awesome. Okay. Well, I think that's a good stopping point. So if you have questions that don't get answered in a webinar, feel free to shoot me a message on LinkedIn or post it on our page. I'd like to do this again. I think this is a really good way to get
It's much easier for me.
All right. Well, thank you, Roger. All right. See you next
Take care.
time.
Thanks, everyone.